The world we live in is full of things we don't understand. Being the curious creatures we are, we naturally try and seek these things out. Doing so has led us to remarkable discoveries and inventions that we never could have imagined over 100 years ago. We've defeated disease, built to the sky itself, and even created machines that could take us beyond the clouds and into the stars. If our ancestors could see us and what we have created, I'm sure many of them would think of us as gods. Our innate curiosity and lust for knowledge has not always led us to greatness, however. True evil and darkness have also been uncovered in humanity's conquest of knowledge, and in the end, I fear this evil will be our doom. I do not say this from the standpoint of a great philosopher who has sat and simply pondered things either. No, I say this because I have seen it, experienced it. I was a part of it. The event that I am about to relay to you is true in its entirety. This, I swear. And I feel certain that this will fall on deaf ears, and many of you will believe this to just be another spooky story meant to give you cheap thrills. But I promise you that this is neither my intent nor my purpose. The purpose of this story is to simply warn you of what lurks beyond the veil of what we can see and understand, to show you what awaits us in the darkness, even if I myself don't understand it. What I am about to tell you has happened, and I feel certain that it will happen again. In 1971, a not-so-well-known scientist began preparations for an extremely secretive project known simply as the Harbinger Experiment. I would like to keep the identity of the scientist a secret for personal reasons. So throughout this recounting, I will refer to him as Zimmerman. Zimmerman's background is unclear at best beyond 1971. All that is known about him before that time is that he grew up somewhere in Maryland with a strange fascination for the occult and supernatural. The latter made him an outcast among his fellow scientists due to how scoffed upon the metaphysical was at the time. Zimmerman's opinions concerning the otherworldly were not the sole cause for him being an outcast, though. It was his methods that made him widely unaccepted among his peers. Zimmerman was well known during his time for being ruthless and cold beyond measure. He never cared about the means. All that mattered to him was results. And if he predicted the results to be valuable enough, anything would be worth obtaining them. It was this insatiable and brutal lust for the truth that made him feared among those who knew of him. And the few that knew of him and did not fear him believed in him and followed him and his work closely. The word Harbinger itself has such a mysterious and intimidating taste to it. Maybe it's the way it rolls from our tongues, or maybe it's simply due to its association with the project. But the word always seems to carry a certain amount of doom with it, which would make sense, as the word itself means to warn or forebode. I can't imagine Zimmerman's reason for giving the experiment this title, but in retrospect, it fits perfectly. Zimmerman came to a select few, me being one of them. He told us he was working on something big, and that he needed people who could keep confidentiality and not spread idle gossip of his work. While he did not fully trust some of us, he did know that we were professionals and that for some reason or another, we were all in dire need of employment. I had worked at the local clinic as a doctor, but I was caught stealing medication and was promptly fired. This left a very dark mark on my resume, so work was hard to find. I was also a native to Alaska and lived near where the experiment would take place, so I guess you could say I was a convenient choice. As you can imagine, I jumped at the opportunity. It was hard not to when I saw the payout. 15 of us were hired in total. Some were colleagues of his that had been working with him for a while, some were maintenance workers, and a few were hired as private security. I was the only medical professional to be hired. It's still a wonder to me how he even attained the funds necessary for the experiment. I would not be wholly surprised if his financing was not entirely legal. But, legal or not, I needed the money, and he was paying. Looking back, it's a decision I've come to regret. After Zimmerman obtained his money, he used it to buy a relatively large plot of land deep in the frozen wilderness of Alaska. And upon that piece of land, Zimmerman built a concrete structure, not dissimilar to a bunker in fact. The sole difference being that its goal was to keep any potential damage contained within the structure rather than keeping it out, as he put it. Most of the structure dug underneath the earth, which had the effect of making the underground complex seem so much smaller than it really was from the outside, as would be expected. There was only one way of entering and leaving the underground structure, and it was via a ladder that led from a small, unassuming concrete building on the surface, which I'll refer to from now on as the entrance building for convenience, to the network below. After everyone had gone to bed at night, the hatch that contained the ladder would be sealed off with a very large and thick metal lid. Zimmerman was very strict about this. Located not too far away from the entrance building was a series of wooden cabins that would serve as the sleeping quarters for the staff Zimmerman had hired. Compared to the entrance building standing on the surface, the underground system was massive. At the center of the complex was the control room. This is where all the facility's electronics and such were linked to. This included security cameras, lights, and door controls. Consoles, monitors, and computers lined the walls of this large central chamber. This is also where the ladder in the entrance building connected to in the underground complex. Connected to the control room were 3 doors. One led to a smaller room that served as the infirmary, another led to a break room, and the final door led into the hallways. The hallways are where the complex began to feel extremely eerie. They were for some reason laid out in an extremely confusing scheme that led in circles and to complete dead ends. These hallways made up a vast majority of the complex, and it would have been very easy to get lost in the maze if you were unfamiliar with it. But, if you knew where you were going, you would find yourself standing before one of 3 8x8 rooms before too long. Each room had a camera hooked up to one of the corners of the room, and all 3 of those cameras were connected to a corresponding monitor located in the control room. Cameras were also scattered throughout the hallways so that whoever was watching the corresponding monitor could see anywhere they wanted to, whenever they wanted to. Thick metal doors stood at the entrance of each of the 3 8x8-foot rooms, and in order to open them, you would have to enter a 4-digit code into a panel located near the door. I remember when I first arrived at the complex, how badly the hallways frightened me. I've always been claustrophobic, you see, and those hallways were so very narrow. The noise, or more accurately, the lack of noise, was also a tremendous source of fear for me in those bleak, narrow halls. It was always so unnaturally silent, as if the entire world had stopped moving. It really made you feel like you were trapped down there. Thankfully, though, I only rarely ventured into those hallways, for I was the only medical professional in the facility and I had virtually no reason to go into them. In the beginning, I found it peculiar that Zimmerman would ask for a medical professional like myself on a project like this, but by the time it was all over, I understood why. The official purpose of the Harbinger Experiment was to test and observe the effects of extended isolation on the human mind. Or, this is what was listed on reports being sent out at least. But unbeknownst to all those who are not participating in the project, excluding the subjects, the true purpose was much darker. Like I said before, Zimmerman had always had an obsession with the occult and supernatural. He sought to prove himself to those who did not believe in him. He wanted physical proof that the supernatural was a real phenomenon, and he wanted to be the first one to attain said proof. The true purpose of the Harbinger Experiment was to find proof of the metaphysical, a world we could not see. The thought of doing this was naturally a tad bit daunting and even scary, but it was Zimmerman's method of doing so that was truly terrifying. Zimmerman believed that he would be able to open a portal between worlds momentarily, allowing 3 random entities to cross over into our world, and each one of these beings would be trapped within one of the 3 rooms. Zimmerman had the theory that any entity would try and latch on to the nearest living thing that had the capacity for it. He wanted to use this technique to trap a spirit in physical form by allowing it to enter a living being that had been injected with a compound mixture of Zimmerman's creation. In theory, this compound would keep the entity from simply leaving whatever it was attached to. The only way it would be able to leave a host who had been injected with the compound was through death. According to Zimmerman, the host would have to be something living, with a will strong enough to survive the possession. And there is only one known species that possesses the amount of will required for this: humans. Zimmerman had also done something to ensure that the entities would only enter the 3 rooms and that there would only be 1 entity per room. Though, I cannot say I know exactly what he did. In fact, I know next to nothing when it comes to how Zimmerman managed to do what he did. He liked to keep his methodology a secret to his most trusted and himself, most likely due to his paranoia that somebody would steal his ideas and take credit for the success of said ideas. If I had known that this was the true purpose before I signed up, I may have reconsidered. But Zimmerman decided not to tell us until we were all gathered at his fortress. Even if any of us wanted to leave, I doubt we would have been allowed to do so. The security team Zimmerman had hired was loyal to him and to the payout. It's not unlikely that Zimmerman had given them the order to not allow anyone to leave. There were 3 different subjects included in the experiment. All were native to Alaska, and each one was lured into the project under the belief that they would be participating in a harmless study of the effect of isolation on the human mind, as I mentioned before. That's why none of the subjects objected when they realized that they would be confined to one of the 3 rooms I mentioned earlier. The first subject was a young man. He was apparently out of work and desperately needed the money that had been offered for participating in the study. The second was a woman. By looking at her, I could tell that she was an addict of some sort. The third and final subject was an older man. A drifter, if I had to guess. One thing that they all had in common was that none of them had any family or friends left. In short, nobody would miss them. which is why they were chosen for the project. I wish I could supply more information about the subjects, but all of this has been drawn from memory, and I was given very little information on the three to begin with. The experiment didn't officially begin until 1987, 16 years after its original announcement. I was eager to begin, so I packed up and headed out to the complex as soon as I was able. I arrived at the compound a week before the subjects had even signed up, and a whole month before the project even began. I wasn't the first to arrive, though, by any means. When I got there, Zimmerman, his colleagues, and the security team had already arrived. I suppose you could say I was the first among the people Zimmerman did not trust to arrive. Everyone else got there about a week before the experiment began. There was a noticeable rift between those who were there simply for the money, like me, and those who were followers of Zimmerman. On October 15th, 1987, all the preparations were in place. The subjects had been sealed in their rooms. The cameras, lights, and speakers were fully operational, and all the staff members had settled in. The time had come for the experiment to officially begin. Zimmerman asked everyone to report to the control room around 9 p.m. to witness the beginning of the experiment. He wanted everyone to be present when he proved that all his theories had been correct and that he was not just a madman. He wanted us all to see the fruits of his labor. When everyone had finally gathered in the large control room, Zimmerman turned to us and simply said, "Observe." He then turned his back to us, leaned into the microphone that would project his voice through the three rooms, and he began chanting in a strange language that I feel certain nobody but Zimmerman would understand. We all observed the three large monitors on the wall, silently waiting for something to happen. The subjects all stood in their room, dumbstruck by Zimmerman's chanting, staring at the monitors with confused expressions on their faces. After about 5 minutes, I felt something awful. I can't explain exactly what it was, but a horrible feeling of dread washed over me, riddling me with fear. It was then that the ground actually began to shake subtly and the lights began to flicker. Zimmerman continued chanting into the microphone as if nothing was off or wrong, while the subjects began dashing around in their rooms, screaming for help. Then, suddenly, the ground stopped shaking and the monitor's image turned into static. The air began to become very heavy as we all stared at the monitors, waiting for them to regain their image and show us what was happening, or had happened, in those three rooms. For a while, everything was silent. But then, there was screaming. The screams of a woman going through unbearable pain and terror began to echo through the compound. The similar screams of men began to coincide with woman's terrified screams, and together they mixed into an awful symphony of pain and fear that beat mercilessly into our ears. Those of us who were here for the money began to give each other scared looks, while those loyal to Zimmerman seemed completely unfazed. We wanted to leave and never come back to this awful place, but we all knew deep down that Zimmerman would never allow that to happen. We were here for the long haul, and there was no escape. It was 10:13 p.m. when the screaming finally stopped. The monitors had yet to reveal to us what had occurred in those three rooms. As soon as the screaming ended, Zimmerman stood and dismissed us all for the night, adding that we were all forbidden to come back into the compound until 10 a.m. tomorrow morning. Not like any of us wanted to. We all solemnly made our way out of the compound and towards the cabins and settled in for the night. I feel it's safe to say that not all of us slept well that night. I know I didn't. The following morning, all of the staff had arrived at the entrance building. We all stood inside, exchanging tired or nervous looks as we waited for Zimmerman to arrive and open the hatch that concealed the ladder. I could see palpable fear in the eyes of some of us, while others did not seem to have even been remotely affected by what happened last night. Zimmerman showed up 5 minutes after 10, apologizing for his tardiness as he came through the door of the entrance building. He opened the hatch and, without any hesitation, began descending the ladder downwards into the black abyss. He almost seemed enthusiastic. I was the first to follow behind Zimmerman's dark descent into the facility. It seemed that the further I climbed down, the more the darkness closed in on me, as if it were trying to swallow me whole. As I climbed deeper, I couldn't help but feel that this place was different somehow. While before there was only the unsettling concrete hallways and rooms, now there was something else. Something made the eeriness feel so real and personified. I felt like a horrible and gruesome scene awaited us down there, but I continued climbing downward despite my fear and hesitation. This was no longer just a spooky bunker. There was a darkness and malevolence in the air. A true evil now lived here, and I could feel it. I think we all could. I finally felt my feet touch the floor and let out a silent sigh of relief to be on solid ground again. Almost as if on cue, the light bulbs came alive, dousing the room in their warm and welcome light. Zimmerman must have turned on the power, I thought. I allowed myself to take a couple seconds to examine the control room. It was exactly as we had left it last night, for which I gave a silent and thankful prayer. It was almost as if nothing unusual had ever happened. I shook myself from my thoughts as I remembered the static-filled monitors from the night before. I let my eyes slowly make their way towards the monitors on the wall, anticipating the grim and fearful scenes that would be on them. My attention was first grabbed by monitors 1 and 3, which were still pure static. It would have been a small relief, but then the motionless image on monitor 2 caught my eye. Room 2 was entirely still, and everything seemed completely untouched. I couldn't help but gasp as I noticed the only thing that was different. The woman lay in the center of the small concrete room. An expression of fear and terror was frozen into her gaunt face as she lay silent and lifeless on her back. Zimmerman's expression turned angry when he saw this. He ordered that second monitor be turned off, and it was. We didn't ask why. I mean, it's not like any of us wanted to see the dreadful scene any longer. He also ordered that if the images in monitors 1 and 3 did not return within the next 2 hours, the security team would be sent to investigate the rooms. The security team nodded at hearing this, and they made it seem as if they had no fear, but I could see it in their eyes. The subtly loud tick of the clock was the only sound that echoed through the control room while I stared at the monitors. An hour and 50 minutes had gone by, and static was still all that occupied monitors 1 and 3. All of the other staff members were working, save for myself. This was due to the fact that the project had been completely injury-free thus far, so I essentially had nothing to do but wait for somebody to hurt themselves. Zimmerman, a couple of his colleagues, and I were the only ones that occupied the room. They quietly chatted amongst each other on the other side of the room while I spent my time reading and pondering the situation I currently found myself in. I had clearly made a mistake coming here. The corpse lying in room 2 was evidence enough of that. And God only knew what awaited us in rooms 1 and 3. My thoughts were soon interrupted as Monitor 3's image returned. The clear image now displayed on the screen made everyone's eyes noticeably widen. What was displayed on the monitor was horrifying. A humanoid thing stood in the center of the room, staring directly at the camera, unmoving. It was wearing the jumpsuit that Subject 3 had been issued, but this clearly was not the same man that had entered the room. What caught my attention first were its eyes. They were solid black and twice the size of normal human eyes. They seemed so endless and so cold. Its head had also grown with the eyes in such a symmetrical and unsettling manner. The being had also shed all of the hair it once had had, and even from the monitor I could see how unnaturally smooth and clear its skin was. It had also seemingly grown in height and stature, which could be seen by the fact that the jumpsuit was now obviously far too small for its wearer. Its limbs had grown especially long. Its arms hung almost as low as the creature's knees. What we were looking at was in no way the same man we had sent inside. Fear was all that I felt as I continued to stare into the monitor at the thing in the room. And my fear seemed to be shared by those around me, which felt kind of good. It may sound awful, but it was a bit satisfying to see that Zimmerman and his colleagues could feel fear too. But at the same time, it was worrying because this showed that this was not part of Zimmerman's plan. Something had gone wrong. We all stared into the monitor at the thing, despite our fear. It was almost as if we were in a trance. My already present fear began to grow and spread rapidly through my body as I became lost in the creature's eyes, trapped in its terrifyingly hypnotic gaze. After what felt like forever, I managed to break eye contact with the creature and divert my attention from the monitor, and when I did so, I felt my fear levels drop considerably. After a short while, Zimmerman ordered his security team to make their way into Subject 1's door just as he said he would do. The security team left without question, armed only with batons and pistols. I then focused my attention on watching the men progress through the hallways towards Subject 1's room via the cameras. Even though the cameras weren't exactly high definition, it wasn't hard to tell that these men were afraid of what awaited them. Their heads were downcast as they walked. They did not possess the same confidence within them that they did when this project began. To be honest, they looked like scared little boys being sent off to a terrible war. Eventually, they made it to the door. We had perfect vision of them and the door via the hallway camera. One of them said something through their walkie-talkies and made a motion towards it. In response, one of Zimmerman's colleagues buzzed the door open. The men already had their pistols out by the time the button was pushed. Slowly, the door began to open. We all watched eagerly as the men began to approach the door, guns aimed inside. Suddenly, and without warning, there was a loud shriek, and as something bounded out of the room at the men, the monitor turned into static. Immediately, we could hear screaming echoing down the hallways, followed shortly after by the distinct sound of gunshots. We could do nothing but wait. After a couple minutes, the screaming and gunshots stopped. We all waited and prayed, hoping that whatever it was that bounded at them from the room wouldn't be the one to return to the control room. After a couple more minutes, 3 of the men came back, carrying with them the corpse of the 4th. He had massive lacerations covering his chest, and his face was absolutely shredded. You couldn't even tell who he was anymore, or that he was even human. I was used to gore, being a doctor and all, so I felt somewhat unfazed by the massive shredded flesh and bloodied meat they carried with them, but many of the others went pale and vomited. The security team all wore emotionless expressions and eyes filled with terror. One of the men finally looked up at us. He stared at us for a while. "It's dead," he finally managed to mutter in a shaken and scared voice. A couple hours went by. The dead man's name was Frank. He was buried outside in the cold Alaskan ground. 2 of the men were unharmed, physically at least. The 3rd was alive, but only barely. His body was covered in bloody slashes, and one of his eyes had been gouged out. I managed to stabilize him, but only just. The other 2 men vaguely explained what happened. Apparently, Subject 1 leaped out at Frank after the door had opened. Only, it wasn't really Subject 1 anymore. According to them, it had a hideously contorted face and long, sharp claws. They claimed to have shot it over a dozen times before it fell dead, and then they emptied another dozen bullets into it just to be sure it was really dead. Only once it was dead did they come back. After tending to the wounded man, I went to investigate the monitors. As afraid as I was of seeing what those monitors may hold, I had to. Subject 3 was the only one left now, and I needed to see it to make sure the creature was still in his room. It seemed more like a jail cell than an ordinary room at this point, though, but that was probably a good thing. The cameras displaying Subject 1's room and the hallway outside of it just displayed a static-filled screen. Nobody was sent to repair them nor investigate. We just had to hope that Subject 1 was well and truly dead. Monitor 3's image was exactly the same as I had left it. Subject 3 was still staring directly into the camera at us. He was still in the exact same position, and if it were not for the small fan in the corner of the room, I would think that I was looking at a still image. In a way, I felt relief at seeing this. Relief that he was still in his room and hadn't escaped while nobody was looking. After everything quieted down, I noticed something especially unusual. There was a strange sound emanating from somewhere. At first, it was barely noticeable. The only reason I heard it was because of how extremely quiet it was in the infirmary. But as time went by, it slowly began to increase in volume. After about an hour, it was loud enough that everyone else could hear it too. And after a couple more hours, the volume had increased so much that we could determine what the noise was. It was a song. Apparently, one of the staff members identified it as Living in the Sunlight by Tiny Tim. According to him, his father loved the song and listened to it frequently. The song seemed to be on a loop and kept replaying itself. Although we were able to identify the noise, we remained unable to identify its source. We knew that it wasn't coming from the speakers because we had them turned off. It seemed to be emitting from the walls themselves. More time ticked by as we began to become increasingly agitated by the song. I spent most of my time in the infirmary attending to Frank or in the control room. Fear hung in the air, and the presence of unmistakable darkness and evil was no doubt its source. Subject 3 still had not moved. He had kept his unblinking gaze fixed on the camera the entire time. It always felt like he was staring directly at me, no matter where I was in the room. I think that this effect was also felt by others because they seemed to move around a lot in the room and for seemingly no reason. After a few hours, the song was so loud that people almost had to shout in order to communicate. We had been trying to find its source so that we could turn the song off, but it was to no avail. The source was completely unidentifiable. This added a level of extreme irritation to our already present fear. It was around 8:30 that the ground itself began to shake once again, just as it had done the previous night. Panic began to spread among my fellow employees and I as the shaking grew in intensity. During this, I had the sudden instinctual feeling to look over at Subject 3's monitor. Subject 3 was gone. Almost as if on cue, the power went out, and thankfully, the song did as well. Ever since the security team came back, panic had been slowly building up among the staff, and Zimmerman was powerless to stop it. When those lights went out, the calm projections that everyone had been trying to maintain left us, and the fear in all of our hearts took over. The emergency backup lights kicked on shortly after the power went out, which I gave a silent, thankful prayer for. The lights were dim, but they still allowed me to see a lot. Total panic seized us as many of my fellow staff members began screaming and rushing to the ladder in an attempt to escape. But far too many were trying to use it at once, and nobody was able to get very far on the ladder without someone else pulling them to the floor and taking their place. Zimmerman was shouting for everyone to calm down, but his dominating and intimidating personality had no effect here, and his demands fell upon deaf ears. It was total chaos. It wasn't long until people actually started hurting each other in their desperate attempts to get up that ladder and out of this place. I could only stand against the wall and wait for my opportunity to escape up the ladder. All the screams were soon silenced as the familiar hum of that unsettling tune began to rise in volume again. Only much, much quicker this time. And this time, it was clear that the noise was coming directly from the maze-like corridors. People stopped fighting and shouting as all our attention shifted to the door that led into the hallways. The song quickly got louder than I had ever heard it before, which forced many of us to cup our ears in an attempt to silence the noise. Then, without warning, the song just completely stopped. Silence. That was all that filled the room as we all stared at the thick metal door in anticipation for what was coming. It felt like ages had gone by, but in reality, it was probably only seconds before the silence was broken. The door suddenly and violently burst open, and the music started again, louder than it had ever been before. The suddenness and the volume of this caused many of us to recoil by falling to the ground and grabbing our ears in an attempt to block out the noise. I glanced up for just a second, and in the doorway stood a tall, smooth-skinned figure with long limbs and eyes so dark and malevolent that you could clearly see them in the dim lighting. After I got my bearings, I looked upwards at the creature once again, just in time to see the thing pick up and rip Zimmerman in half with one fluid movement, dousing the room and everyone in it with his blood, intestines, and organs. I was no stranger to gore, but the sight of that was too much for me to bear. I hunched over and immediately vomited all over the cold cement floor. That ladder is my only hope of survival, I thought to myself as I forced myself into a standing position. And as my eyes rose along with the rest of me, I could see the thing ripping and tearing through the people as they scattered in vain attempts to escape it. It was distracted, and, as awful as it sounds, this was my only chance to get up that ladder. I forced my legs to move towards the ladder, trying to block out the terrified screams of my fellow staff members and the unbearably loud music. I could hear gunshots coinciding with the screams and terrible sounds of flesh being ripped apart somewhere in the mess of noise. I reached my hands outwards and felt a wave of relief wash over me as my fingers came into contact with the hard metal rungs of the ladder. I gripped them and began to climb upwards as quickly as I could in my disoriented state, all the while praying that the monster would not see me and pull me off the ladder and back into the slaughter. It felt like at any moment I would feel one of its smooth hands wrap around my ankles and pull me to my death. But I eventually made it to the top. There was no question in my mind. I had to close the hatch and seal the thing down there, even if it meant certain death for my colleagues. I couldn't allow that thing to escape. I gripped the thick metal lid and began to push with all my might in an attempt to steal the underground complex off. Despite how dense and sturdy it was, the lid was surprisingly easy to move and didn't take much effort to push over the hatch. In seconds, the hatch was completely covered by the dense metal lid. I collapsed on my side and began to vomit some more as exhaustion took over me. And as I lay there, I realized something. Aside from my labored breaths, the only thing I could hear was the faint echo of that song from down below. I felt as though I would lose more of my sanity if I continued to lay there and listen to that song, so I once again forced myself to my feet and began to make my way to the wooden lodge I had stayed in the previous night. It was where I had left my baggage, and also where I had left the keys to my truck. Of the 15 staff members that took part in that forsaken experiment, I'm the only one who survived. I've never returned to that awful place where all of it happened, and I don't intend to. The project was very secretive, and Zimmerman was the only one who knew all the details about it. And as far as I know, nobody is aware of my involvement aside from me. In fact, I'm probably the only person on Earth who knows what the Harbinger Experiment truly was, let alone what actually happened. By now, you're probably wondering why I've told all of you about something none of you should be aware of. Maybe you're expecting me to give you a speech about not messing with things you don't understand or something along those lines. I hope not, for I have no speech to give. But I began hearing a noise earlier today. Almost immediately, I recognized the noise as a very haunting and familiar song. I didn't even try to trace it to its source. And as the day progressed, the song has increased in volume. It's loud enough now that I can clearly make out the lyrics, and I'm completely unable to escape Tiny Tim's voice. It's followed me everywhere I go. Subject 3 is coming for me, and I know that my time left in this world is extremely limited now. I guess you could say that I just wanted to tell the tale of the Harbinger Experiment before it was lost forever. I hope that you'll take some lesson from what I've recounted to you, but I think we both know you won't. Let's be honest, you don't believe a word of what I've just told you, and I don't blame you. I guess I wouldn't believe me either if I were you. To you, this is probably nothing more than something to get your cheap thrills from. You were probably mindlessly surfing the internet when you clicked a link and found yourself here, wherever here may be, watching this video. And to be honest, I don't care if you believe me or not. Even if you do, it probably won't stop you from trying to uncover the truth of a darkness that few of us have ever seen. It certainly never stopped Zimmerman. If you want a lesson, look at what happened to him when he went seeking the truth. I pray that none of you will ever discover this truth. I pray that none of you have to ever see the evil that I have seen. I hope you all get to live in ignorance of what lies beyond the veil of what we can understand. It's here now, and I feel its black eyes burning into me, just as I could all those years ago. I am as much to blame as Zimmerman is for the monstrosity that is now free to roam the world, even if I was not the one to create it. Please forgive me. Despite wearing at least 3 layers of jackets, the first thing Jamie felt upon awakening was the cold. His thick beard, which was covered in a rather thin layer of snow, had also done little to warm his face. As the man began to open his eyes, he felt something else. Pain. A hiss escaped his lips as the throb of sharp stinging echoed throughout his body. Jamie brought his gloved hand to the source of his suffering, which seemed to be originating from his forehead. As soon as he touched the wound, more pain began to resonate throughout him, causing the man to wince. Bringing his hand before him, Jamie could see a streak of red stained into the glove. "Fuck," he whispered in his shivering voice. As the blur in his vision finally faded, Jamie was able to make out his surroundings. In front of him were the shattered remains of his windshield, through which freezing blizzard winds circulated, ensuring his continued lack of warmth. The driver's seat in which he sat let out a creaking noise as he shifted to open the door. Thankfully, he found that it wasn't jammed. With a burst of strength, Jamie pushed his way out of the vehicle and face first into the cold, bitter snow. There was more pain, but it didn't faze him. The icy slush had made his face too numb to feel much of anything. Not wanting to die facing down in the freezing white fluff, Jamie quickly rolled onto his back so he could face upwards. The wind was, as he discovered, even worse without the shelter of his broken truck. The day had since left the accident as well, taking the sun and its healing heat with it. All that surrounded him was darkness coated with the whipping winds of a blizzard. Remembering the pack of emergency supplies he always kept in the truck, Jamie slowly rose to his feet and proceeded back to the driver's side door. He found it quickly, which was hardly a surprise considering how cramped the cabin of his vehicle really was. Inside the leather backpack was a flashlight, peanuts, spare gloves, jerky, flares, a flare gun, a flint and steel, and other miscellaneous things that would no doubt help in his survival. The man quickly proceeded to throw the bag strap over his shoulder. It was then that he noticed the Magnum, which had been haphazardly thrown in the passenger seat. He made sure to grab that too. The wilds of Alaska were a dangerous place, after all. It was only then that Jamie realized something terrifying. He had no idea where he was. Sure, he had been traveling through this area for years, and in any other circumstance, he would have known exactly where to go. But the blizzard made it near impossible to determine his location, let alone which direction would lead him back to his cabin or to the road. The storm crippled his senses and confused his thoughts. Never before had he witnessed such a vicious expression of nature in all the years he'd lived in the area. The only clue he really had was that the road was somewhere south of his truck, for it was the direction that he came. Traveling that way, however, was impossible. An exceedingly steep cliff of snow blocked his path. Frankly, he was surprised he'd survived the accident at all. At that speed and level of descent, he should have died. Clicking on his flashlight, Jamie did the only thing he could do. He began to wander in a random direction in an attempt to find some kind of shelter. It was either that or freeze to death, and he knew it. He only hoped that Lady Luck would help him find his way. Through the deep snow and raw winds, Jamie traveled. He was cold, he was alone, and most of all, he was afraid. After what seemed like an eternity of growing frostbite and freezing temperatures, the bright beam of the man's flashlight came to fall upon something very out of place in the forest that surrounded him. Right away, he knew that it wasn't just another tree, neither was it a rock. No, this was a wall. As he neared the anomaly, hope began to grow within him. A sigh of relief escaped his frozen blue lips as he reached the wall. Examining it, he quickly determined that it was indeed the concrete wall of some structure. Slowly, he began to follow it around two corners until finally coming upon an open doorway. Somehow, in the middle of nowhere, he had come to stumble upon an actual building. Although he didn't adhere to any specific religion, Jamie couldn't help but mutter a prayer of thanks. Without any hesitation, he moved inside the concrete building, stumbling over himself and to the floor as he did so. Shining the flashlight around from his kneeling position, he began to understand how small the room really was. It couldn't have been any more than 10 feet across and 10 feet wide, with an extremely low ceiling. Only then did he notice it. The circular hatch lying in the center of the room. At first, he wasn't sure what to think. It wasn't really all that common to see something like this out here, so deep in the frozen forests of Alaska. The building, the hatch, they intrigued him. Regardless, the building itself would not suffice as shelter, for the whipping wind still screeched through the wide open doorway. While it was much better than being outside, Jamie feared, rather he knew, that he would still die that night if he did not seal the doorway somehow, or find somewhere more protected. With nothing in his pack to keep the wind from entering the small room, his eyes naturally turned towards the hatch lying dormant in the center. He slowly began to move towards it, forcing his frozen bones forward until he was standing over it. With a burst of strength and energy, he pushed the heavy lid of the hatch open. Awestruck, he found himself staring downwards into the dark abyss of the hole before him. For a moment, he hesitated. He felt something sinister from within. Shaking away his fear, which was no doubt extremely irrational, he gripped the top metal rung of the ladder and began his descent. Relief washed over him as his foot finally touched the floor. Above him, he could only just hear the raging winds, and they couldn't reach him down there. Darkness, however, surrounded him on all sides. Not a noise was to be heard down there, nor was there any kind of visible light to illuminate his surroundings. Thankfully, Jamie still had his trusty flashlight. The sight that greeted him when he turned it on was not as he'd expected. Lined across the walls were old consoles and monitors, which no doubt predated the 90s. To his left, on the far wall, was a door, and adjacent to that, on the wall to his back, was another. The walls and floors were partially coated with what appeared to be some kind of red paint, though it seemed to have decayed considerably over time. Some of it had even managed to get on the consoles, the monitors, and the doors. To the far wall on his right was something rather disturbing. It was another door, only this one appeared to have been torn from its hinges and tossed upon the floor, leaving an open doorway through which nothing but darkness was visible. Jamie found himself unsettled by the whole thing. He wanted to leave, yet he felt he could not. He was trapped, and it scared him greatly. Suddenly, a noise not dissimilar to the ruffling of paper came from somewhere in the darkness. He quickly and readily turned towards it, unsure of what to expect. He almost felt relieved when he saw the plain white papers scattered across the floor. The wind from above must have moved them, he thought, trying to convince himself of what he knew could not be true. Cautiously, the grizzled man shuffled towards the pile of scattered papers. Upon reaching them, he took a kneeling position and grabbed a page up in his hand. It was small, as if it had, at one point, belonged to a journal of some kind. Across the top, the text read, October 16th, 1987. Intrigued, Jamie did what any man in his position would. He read on. It's about 8:23 p.m. as I write this. The music is still going, and somehow it keeps getting louder. The maintenance guys checked the speakers over a dozen times now. They keep claiming that it's the only place it could be coming from. No one believes it, though. We all know where it's coming from, even if we don't want to believe it. It's Subject 3. It has to be. I don't know how or why it's doing it, and I don't think I really want to. This whole thing, this experiment, has gotten way out of hand. Duskin has lost all authority. Not even he knows what's happening here. We followed him for so goddamn long, and this is where he leads us? To our own fucking tomb? He hasn't said it, no one has, but we all know it. We're going to die here. I can feel it in my bones and sense it every time I look at the damn monitor. Subject 3? I don't know what the hell it is, and I won't pretend to. All I know is that those terrible fucking eyes convey nothing but a desire to kill. It feels like they're just toying with us now. Everyone's on edge. Everyone is afraid. I can see it in their eyes. The only person who seems to be even remotely composed is that doctor. We're all pacing around trying to shake the fear away. Well, he just sits there in that damn chair of his, staring off into nothingness and scribbling God knows what into that diary of his. Some of us considered leaving. With those guards incapacitated, no one's going to try and stop us. I can only imagine what they went through. I'm just glad I wasn't there to see it. Regardless, it's time to go. I think the world should know about what's happened here. Duskin can't keep doing this. More red paint was splattered across the page, making it impossible to read further. What is this place? Jamie whispered to himself in dreary darkness. Where once Jamie had only been vaguely afraid, he was now full of fear. He didn't know where he was. He didn't know what had transpired here, but he was, more than anything else, afraid.
The shivering was no longer entirely due to the cold, and he knew it. He didn't want to know anything else. He didn't want to know what happened here. He just wanted to leave, just as the man or woman who wrote that entry did. Yet, he couldn't. It was either fear or a cold, lonely death. And he wasn't about to let fear chase him back out into that storm. Oddly enough, the feeling he felt in his gut was similar to the one of hunting a bear for your first time. The difference, however, was that he could track the bear, and he wasn't alone when he did so. In there, though, in that bunker of terrible secrets and even worse experiments, he was alone, and without any way to track the threat. Not to mention, he didn't even know what the threat really was. Yes, he was armed. But where was the bear? Like an answer to a prayer, a sound suddenly emitted from the room on the far left wall. Only, it wasn't just a sound. No, it was something else. It was music. The melody was quiet, only just reaching his ears through the thick metal door. With the finesse of a hunter, Jamie readied his magnum in one hand and crept toward the door with his flashlight shining in the other. Upon reaching it, he slowly and quietly put his ear to the cold metal surface. Not only could he hear the melody with perfect clarity, but he could also make out the lyrics. "I don't worry," the high-pitched singing voice said. "Worrying don't agree. Things that bother you never bother me." He pulled away from the door. What the hell is going on here? He thought to himself. I've got to get in there. With his fears suppressed, Jamie took a step away from the door. He breathed in slowly and then out, calming the pounding drum that was his heartbeat. With both magnum and flashlight readied, he quickly pushed the door handle downwards and put his weight into the door, opening it in one fluid motion. He couldn't help but retch at the sight before him. There were bodies everywhere, every single one mutilated in one way or another. Some were only missing limbs. Others were barely recognizable as human. What he now realized as blood covered all the walls and floors, making the dull concrete walls nearly invisible. The mutilation of the corpses, however, wasn't the most disturbing part. All of them were posed in various dancing positions. There were no harnesses or cables. All of them seemed to be held up by their own force and volition. And inscribed into each of their faces was an expression of utter terror and dismay. Jamie, in a state of panic and fear, quickly fled the room, shutting the door behind him. It was then that he saw it. Across the room, standing over the door which had been torn off its hinges so long ago, was something even worse than what waited through the door behind him. He studied it intently, while it seemingly did the same to him. It stood tall, lanky, and completely devoid of hair, with a strangely elongated head and eyes darker than the most desolate areas of space. Various parts appeared to be missing as well, such as its ears and nose. It wore a gray jumpsuit which seemed much too small for the monster. Its long porcelain limbs were indescribably smooth in texture, possessing a kind of cleanliness Jamie had never seen anywhere else. Its long, skinny fingers hung perfectly still at its side. Its expression was one of complete indifference. and across the left part of its chest was what appeared to be a name tag, which read in big, bold letters, Subject 3. Without a second thought, Jamie quickly brought his magnum up and aimed it at the monster. The creature, however, was much faster. With impossible speed, it crossed the room before the terrified man could fire off a single bullet. In one fluid motion, it smacked the gun out of his hand, grabbed him by the neck, and pinned him against the wall. Jamie struggled, for it was all he could do. He pulled at the demon's hand and kicked its legs, but it was to no avail. The monster's strength was vastly superior to his. In his peril, Jamie could only utter one question through the tight grip of the thing's cold fingers. "What are you?" Subject 3 leaned in close to his ear. Its voice wasn't really a voice. It was something else entirely. It possessed no tone, no mood, no frequency. Only an ethereal hum coded in language. And in that horrible, toneless voice, it whispered to Jamie, "Something impossible." Without warning, the music grew in volume to such a point that Jamie's ears actually began to bleed. Living in the sunlight, loving in the sunlight, having a wonderful time, the terrible sing-song voice echoed full of glee. The poor, helpless man couldn't help but scream as his eardrums began to pop one after the other. Then, with its eyes staring directly into Jamie's, Subject 3 began tearing at the man's stomach with one hand as it held Jamie against the wall with the other. He watched in terror as his intestines and organs spilled across the floor. He thought he was screaming, but he couldn't hear anything. He begged and he pleaded, but the thing just kept tearing and pulling at his insides. With a final, pathetic gasp, the light left his eyes, and his voice died away. Subject 3 loomed over the corpse of his latest kill, staring at him with absent eyes. For a moment, it considered allowing the dead man to join the others in the room to his rear. It knew, however, that it had no time to continue playing such childish games. No, there was work to be done, blood to be spilled, and questions to be answered. More than that, however, there was fun to be had. Subject 3's old friend, that doctor fellow, managed to skip out last time. Poor man. It wasn't fair that he should be excluded. The doctor was due for a visit, it seemed. Oh, how delighted he would be to see Subject 3. The thing turned its gaze toward the ladder and, at a brisk pace, climbed its rungs one by one until it found itself standing in a small concrete building, surrounded by a vicious blizzard. Blistering wind poured in through the open doorway, rushing over the creature's smooth scalp. It didn't faze Subject 3, though. The creature couldn't even feel it. The once imprisoned monster was free at last. As it stood there, soaking up the cold winds, it couldn't help but think that if it could feel, happiness would no doubt be the emotion present. From a distance, one might claim to have heard something else from within the howling blizzard that night. A song full of joy and smiles, one that would no doubt usher in many good times. And as Subject 3 trudged through the deep snow, it couldn't help but think the same thing. There was fun to be had, and it couldn't wait to get started.